So as you know, and I'm going to use this clicker, and I'm doing pretty good, the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund was established as part of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief and Economic Security, the CARES Act in March 2020, and CARES provided direct funding to states and districts to address the impact of COVID-19 on elementary and secondary schools across the nation. And I know that you've already heard from the elementary principals, so now we're here to tell you what we're doing with this in the secondary schools. And those are our cute little icons up there. So at Brookline Middle School, we broke this up into English. The three areas that we felt needed the most and that we wanted to focus on was the English language arts, math, and then social skills. Because as we were transitioning back, we still had a significant number of students that are still struggling with this transition, and we felt that we could put some of this together in a social skills group after school to kind of help some of these students to feel included and help them to learn how to make friends and go over important topics that are key for middle school students. So we broke this up into, like I said, the English language arts and the math and the social skills. The English teachers that are doing this are Miss Jane Moody and Miss Brittany Tobji, and they break it up for, they're currently grade 6 teachers. One does grade 6 and one does grade 7 and 8. And the reason we did that was we felt that it was the 6th graders coming in needed to work on one skill, and if we kind of mix, not one skill, but some lower skills, 6th grade skills, and if we mixed 7th and 8th graders with them, we might not be able to give them the true focus we needed. So we made the one group 6th grade and then the one group 7th and 8th grade. And what we found as we were doing this, where there were some students in the 7th and 8th grade group, just one or two that might benefit more from going to the 6th grade group and vice versa. So we did kind of make a flip-flop where we felt we needed to for the students. We did the same exact thing with math. We have Mrs. Susan Vicari doing grade 6/7 and Miss Janine Clark doing 7/8. And again, we broke it up by 6th grade skills, those in 7th grade that might be struggling that would work better with 6th grade, and then 8th grade and with 7th grade. And they're such a great team, and they work together and they make sure that they're hitting all the topics and discuss if somebody needs to move sessions. And I'll be honest, at this point, you know, they're set up perfectly and they're running nicely, and we don't need any more flip-flops. And then the last thing we had set up was Miss Bianca Piccinini, who is our social worker at Brookline Middle School, and she, we identified some students that could work in her groups as well. So I'll tell you how we came up with, you know, what students we were going to identify. So each week we have team meetings. We have a 6th grade team meeting, 7th grade team meeting, and 8th grade team meeting. And as you know, like, we have 3 teams on each grade level, and they each have a different day that they meet with the counselor. So it was proposed in there, like, let's identify the students that we think would most benefit from these programs, which students we think would come. And we kind of made a bigger list, knowing that some students aren't going to come all the time. Some students are going to have some other after-school commitments. And we decided to identify there what students we thought would be able to use the English help, the math help, or even potentially go into the social skills group. Then from those students, we also have content area meetings. So then the math teachers would meet together and say, okay, the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade team put together these students. What do you think, as far as math teachers, which ones do you think would be best to utilize this? And then what group would they be better in, the 6-7 group or the 7-8 group? And for English, the 6th group or the 7th-8th group. And we kind of just went through that process. Once we narrowed down who we were going to invite, we sent an email out to parents basically saying, we've identified your student who could use this support after school. You know, if you're interested, please let me know by a specific due date. Most people were responding back yes, which was awesome, and then we would assign the students to these groups, and once they were identified yes, I would let the teachers know, and then the teachers sent a personalized email home to those families and those teachers, as well as the English teacher and like the guidance counselor basically said, okay, you're now going to be staying after school for English extra help, but didn't want to make it like you're staying after school for English extra help. So it's going to be fun. And we had, you know, the teachers are awesome. They have brought snacks. They work in pods. You know, sometimes they're listening to music. They try and make online activities for them. So it's working out very well. The next thing, back to the social skills. So what we also did was, and this worked best with the guidance counselors, but the guidance counselors and the teams met and tried to identify some students who we would think belong or could benefit from the social skills group. And in the social skills group, it's a much smaller group of students, but it's awesome as well because they get to feel included and have an after school activity to attend as well. So in the math, what happens there is the math content area teachers identify the skills that these students might be lacking or need support in, and then the teachers then break it up of how they're going to teach these skills week by week. They get a packet of independent work that they get to take home with them. So if they had their ESSER session today and they were going over certain math skills, they'd go home with a packet, and then they can work on that independently, and if they complete that packet, they can get like an extra point on a test that they completed the packet, a little bit of extra credit. In addition to that, if they know a specific lesson is coming up, especially a tricky one, they'll often preview it. So, on Monday, you guys are going to start working on whatever. They'll preview that lesson to kind of give them a little bit more foundation prior to them coming to the lesson the following week. And then, like I said, they sit in pods and they have nice little snacks and they have a great time. The English is very similar. What they did was they did a diagnostic reading assessment with each student that was in the session. And what it does is it's actually called readtheory.org, and it's an online session. It's a free thing that anybody can sign up to. Lots of teachers use it. And what it does is it kind of gauges what they like and what they don't like as far as reading topics and where their skills are, and it creates a little program for them to work on. So they're also working on their nonfiction reading skills in there, and it creates fun for them because not only, and I put a little clip of the slide that I know Miss Moody uses, so they do like a review game for any lessons or any topics that they know they covered this week in Kahoot, which if you've never played Kahoot before, it's fun and competitive and you want to get that answer in quickly, whether it's the triangle, the square, or the circle, or the rectangle, and try and like beat everybody in the group. So they do the Kahoot. I know Ms. Tobji created like an ELA escape room where they had to answer a certain specific skill before they can go on to the next room, which was very creative. And you think, how can you do an online escape room? But it actually works, and it's very hard, I'm just going to say. But it's a lot of fun for them. And then, of course, they can always take time to work on this readtheory.org, which is specified more to what specific skill they need. And then the social skills area, we were just looking at some of the things that some of the students were struggling with transitioning. Some of them were struggling to make friends or how to approach new people and make friends. A little bit with peer pressure, some with social media. So we created this tight-knit group of students who could just use that support. And when they met with Miss Piccinini, she kind of did icebreakers with them the first time, but then she asked them, like, put out a little survey. What do you guys want to talk about? And it was good because they're cute. They meet after school on Mondays and they sit and talk about things. And in addition to the other clubs, they've now made friends within this social group. So it's awesome to now see them during recess kind of connecting with each other, which is the piece that some students were lacking. And now they got to pick that up. In addition to all of these things, which I know I've talked to you about before, we still have our Lunch and Learn. For any student that is struggling, they can come every single day to Lunch and Learn. The teachers check in with them to see how they're doing. If any student is in danger of failing for the marking period, they almost have to go to Lunch and Learn. The only way to get out is to do your work, and the teachers check in on them, and they really get that support they need. So all of these things together are what we have been working on at Brookline to help our students transition back and gain the skills that they need to continue progressing satisfactorily in a positive way.
I'm going to try not to be too repetitive, although many of our circumstances and the way things are set up are very, very similar, but we do have a few subtle differences that we'll kind of touch on as we go. At Central Middle School, our after-school English assistance teacher is Mrs. Sarah Hare. She's our reading specialist, which has actually worked out extremely nicely. And our after-school math assistant teacher has been Mrs. Mary Ellen O'Hara, who's worked with 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math students as well. So she has also been a great person for that position. It was kind of interesting the way that we were able to decide how we were going to utilize the funds that we had. So I'll kind of share a little bit about that, which we kind of didn't talk about before with Brookline. And although, again, it's very, very similar, we looked at it as, really maximizing the amount of academic support we could get for the kids that we had that needed it, which certainly were, there was plenty of them, after what we've been dealing with for the last couple of years. So we had it set up such that we had 2 sessions of language arts and 2 sessions of mathematics each week. And the students were identified in a pretty similar fashion to the way they were at Brookline. Our guidance counselors met with the teams, as they always do, and content areas and grade level teachers worked with departments, again, to identify the, the skills that these particular students were struggling with. Again, parents were invited to have their students attend. Again, we tried to make it sound as enticing, as we could, and certainly we were pretty pleased with the number of folks that responded right away. And basically, we wanted to be careful with the number of kids that we actually brought into the sessions, because if it got to a point where it was kind of diluted, it was really, we're not going to be able to really do much teaching in there. So we kind of got to that point after maybe a week or two where we had all the sessions filled, and they've been moving along pretty nicely since then. In math, the teacher started off with remediation of weak skills to build understanding, so actually taught lessons on fractions and decimals, as well as place value, things that they were recognizing that really all of the students needed. And at this point in time, they've kind of transitioned to reinforcement of the skills that are being learned in the classes each day with grade level and individual students. And there's a lot of communication with the grade level math teachers. So it's kind of like the Little Red Schoolhouse, where they have 6th, 7th, and 8th graders kind of in groups in that same class. And yeah, the kids are able to kind of move from place to place if that is better suiting their needs. In English, again, our reading specialist was great for this, and she actually conducted diagnostic reading assessments at the beginning of the program, and we kind of identified, which is no surprise, nonfiction reading and essay writing as being skills that the kids really were in need of additional support with. Teachers have really tried to make it engaging for the students. They've used instructional videos and games that they posted in the teacher's Google Classroom, some of which Carly alluded to before. And the reading specialist has worked out well because they really communicate directly with the teachers to determine the targeted skills for each session. They're in their classrooms daily. They sort of are in a co-teaching scenario with those students. So it's been a nice, kind of easy crossover, and she's been able to focus on the things that she knows that they've been working on in the classrooms each day. Again, we're looking for some photographs and things of that, but I will say that sometimes the kids are, the kids in those sessions, by the time the end of the day comes around, they're not always, in the most photogenic mood, but they are. I will say we have a core group. We have a core group that's been coming very, very, pretty religiously, and the teachers are certainly seeing, an improvement and an uptick in their ability in class, which is what we're looking for all along. So thank you very much.
So at the Hills, we split our ESSER money into 2 key areas. One was the math lab that our new teacher, Cynthia Wang, special education teacher Cynthia Wang, oversees, and our SEL facilitator that worked directly with the teachers, Karen Brzezinski, conducts teacher trainings on SEL lessons and skills in the classroom. So on this pyramid of intervention, we had, most of our teachers had a PD goal of identifying gaps and addressing those at the classroom level, and that would be kind of the most broad-based intervention that we had at the bottom. In the middle, I'm just going to talk briefly about how we assigned students and found times to schedule them into tutorial or office hour time, and to ensure that they were getting there. And then ultimately, if that wasn't enough, then our top tier was where the ESSER money came in, which was with our math lab and some of our SEL lessons. So what we found in the beginning was that the students that needed the tutorials the most were not attending, and that there was a real apprehension coming out of virtual instruction to not want to go to office hours. And in lunch with the principal and discussions with students, there was a real apprehension, and talking to the teachers, there was no one going to office hours. So the first thing we did was realize that teachers had either after hours, before hours, during unit lunch, And the first thing we did was to just try to nail down when everyone was available. So we put out a form and the teachers just declared, I'm available at this time. So at that point, we started looking at our most high-need students and started scheduling them to mostly unit lunch tutorial. After that, we had to make sure that they were attending so that we created kind of a working lunch attendance so that we could go back and see the students that were supposed to attend if they actually were. And just organizing that, and in some cases, the assistant principals chasing some of these students down and making sure they're attending, and the guidance counselors kind of working with a team to make sure they got there. What I found is that there was a huge barrier going to the initial help. But once we got them there, what the teachers reported was they were more likely to ask questions in class, that it was less of a chore to escort them to the tutorials, and once we were able to forge those relationships, it kind of took off on its own after that. But there was a real apprehension, especially at the beginning of the year, for any students to look for additional help. So once we coordinated that and we got there, and the counselors and our administrative team did an awesome job of overseeing that and making sure they were getting there. But in a lot of those cases, the teachers were saying that this student is coming regularly, but there's just too much there, and there's not enough time, and I have 4 or 5 students that are coming for help, and there's still just such a big, wide skills gap that, you know, we can't close that. So that's when the ESSER money became available. We had the math lab, which was available after school in the media center. And we also utilized some NHS tutoring, but the math lab has been key. A lot of those students that fell into that category, and you're talking about maybe 10% of those students that were identified. So to give you an idea, we had about 22 students that failed Q1 that made that intervention list. And I was happy to say by the end of semester 1, Q2, 20 of those students had passed. The difficulty was that we had about 30 more students that we identified, so that picture got bigger, that were different. You know, they were different students that, you know, we had to address. But for those students that started attending Math Lab, they did very well. And you're talking students that moved out of district, students from New York City, you know, urban districts, even students that were completely virtual the last 2 years, that we just found that there were gaps and it didn't work for them. And the math lab was able to close that gap, and those students are having success now. So most of the classes that they received tutoring in were some of the entry-level classes of Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. And those went well. The SEL component was a need, and that kind of came from our assessment that a lot of our high absence students, and the way we define that was at the semester mark, you know, you have 16 absences before you lose credit at the end of the year. So if you were around 7 or 8 absences, we considered that high absence and something that we needed to look closer into. What we found is that about a third of those students, it had to do with mental health issues. Either students that were out for some kind of assessment, home instruction, in and out of home instruction, things like that. So we really identified that we had to kind of up our SEL in the classroom, and the frequency in which it happened in each class. There was 5 teachers that were interested in that position, so we formed a committee, interviewed the 5, and hired Karen Brzezinski, who has a great background. She's done a tremendous job with the trainings. We've done the trainings in faculty meetings and the 1-hour PD sessions that we have contractually each month, and that she runs her training sessions there. On top of those training sessions, she's made an online resource, and she's also gone above and beyond, availing herself to the teachers during their preps and during her prep and during unit lunch to do some follow-up sessions with them if they have additional questions. But she's done a nice job of giving activities that they can implement at the classroom level across the curriculum. So they leave it wide open so that they can implement it, whether it's in English, social studies, phys ed, so some great activities, and even kind of on-the-spot activities that she can do before exams and things like that. And one of the key things that we've done is we've made an SEL schedule where if you've done SEL all through the year, that's fine, but we've asked each department to implement at least 2 activities into their lesson plans. And Karen's made an online resource so that teachers can go back and reference all of those resources, and she's broken them down by the 5 CASEL categories so that they can implement those into their lessons, and that's been tremendous. And I also have to compliment Keith, transitioning into him. One of the other great activities in kind of closing that barrier and getting the students to go in for extra help, Keith came up with the idea of having early dismissal days halfway through the quarter and at the end of the quarter. And that's worked out a number of ways. One, there's a 2 o'clock bus that Tiffany Pease has done a great job coordinating with us to get transportation home. So there's really no excuse for any student not to stay for those extra hours. There's no additional time that is requested for the teachers, and it's kind of an informal time, either to make up tests, get extra help. But it's also been an incentive where the teacher says, if this work is not in, you're going to do it with me on this session. And that's been an incentive for all the students to get their work in before the end of the quarter, but also to stay for extra help as well. So we piloted it at the end of semester 1. The feedback from the parents, students, and teachers was that it was a tremendous help. So we did it again in quarter 3, and we're also planning potentially 2 more days for quarter 4, and then we'll reevaluate whether that's something we're going to continue to do or scale back next year. And I'll turn it over to Pete.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Hello, everybody. I'm going to, without belaboring the point, sort of present, I think, a little bit of an illustrative example of that this is working. So what you can see here is a comparison. This is Parsippany High School data specifically, but I know in looking at the data from the other schools over the year that it's maybe not necessarily demonstrative of all 4 secondary schools, but certainly the trends are pretty generalizable. You can see 2021 versus 2018, which is the last non-COVID year. Our numbers this year at the end of marking period 1 in terms of at-risk students, that's anybody with a D or an F, were substantially higher pretty much across the board, specifically in our 9th and 10th grades. Just to look at some trends, these are prior year comparisons. Probably the most significant and easy to follow lines are the top 2, blue and red. The blue line is the number of total courses that students are receiving D's and F's in over the course of the year. This is 2018, 2019, so this is the last non-COVID year. The red line is the number of students who are receiving D's and F's. And you can see the trend is basically an upward tick into second marking period, then they kind of level off through third marking period. That's the same in 2019, 2020, which was the COVID shortened year. You can see it's a little bit more significant. But at the end of the third marking period, we kind of drew back on a lot of some of the more punitive academic measures because of that rapid shift to virtual instruction. So we sort of stopped keeping accurate data from that point forward. And then last year's data is really not something that we can look at. But if you compare those 2 numbers or those 2 sets of data from those 2 years, you can see that upward trend of at-risk increasing. That line going up is a bad thing. That means more students are getting D's and F's over the course of the year. So our goal, really, to simplify, was just making sure that our students were being supported and reaching their graduation milestones, breaking it down, making sure that our students were supported in their core content, academic areas, identifying populations of students that were significantly more impacted by COVID. We did it this way. We looked at marking period 1. At the time, we were also looking at marking period 2 progress, looking at students who are at risk in multiple course areas. We also looked at specific population demographics, individual grades, ESL, special ed, and of course, those students that were in danger of failing, specifically graduation requirements. Very similar to what the other 3 schools shared with you. We sat down as a team. We identified our core population of students that we felt would benefit from intervention. We also identified some specific subpopulations of students that we really thought would benefit from some targeted support. Specifically, our 10th grade, which we go back to that first slide, was significantly higher in terms of at-risk students between 2018 and 2021. Also, our ESL population, which we certainly discovered last year, was very, very, very negatively impacted by virtual instruction. We also identified the subject areas that were populated with the most students with at-risk course outcomes. That would be math, English, and science. So with our ESSER funding and some additional programming, very similar to the other schools, we identified teachers to participate in after-school tutorial sessions. In English, we have Ms. Katie Vesper, and math, Ms. Brianne DiGeronimo, and science, Mr. John Pierkowski. So those teachers are meeting weekly with students for an hour after school. Again, very similar to the other schools. We've had specific outreach to the parents. We've met with the students. We've had our guidance counselors, our teachers, and our individual ESSER tutors reach out to the parents and students to encourage them to come. So that's been positive. We also migrated our after-school homework club to lunchtime. We found that many of our students, specifically our ESL students, were having a lot of difficulty attending after-school tutorial sessions. Many of them work. Many are providing childcare for younger siblings at home. So we needed to migrate some of that into the middle of the day. You can see we also have the ESL Lunch Club, which is run by Ms. Monica Castillo. Mr. Jeremy Chardreau does our lunchtime homework club. As Dr. Thompson said, we piloted our open office hours and tutorial sessions with all staff in January, and then again in March and again in April, which has gone very well. And then something I think is unique to Parsippany High School, when we did our NJGPA infrastructure trial on the 1st of March, our 10th grade students were not involved in that, and so we turned that time into tutorial sessions for them. We had them meet with teachers in classes that they were struggling in. We set up individual extra help sessions for those students. So we can kind of look at this. This is tracking progress. This is this year's data, and you can see not only are we seeing a dramatic incline, dramatic incline. Perfect, it's really working. Dramatic decline in the number of courses and students that are experiencing at-risk Ds and Fs. But if you go back to prior trends in 2018 and 2019, we're bucking those trends. We're actually improving on non-COVID impacted years, which is really great. Breaking it down a little further, this is actually a cohort model study here. So this is the senior class, our current senior class over all 3 years of data. All right, so the top line, the red line, is them in 9th grade. The blue line is them as sophomores, and then the yellow line is them as seniors. So you can see that our current senior class every year prior to this year have sort of increased or remained relatively high with the number of courses in which they've been at risk. But this year, once we installed those ESSER interventions at the end of the 2nd marking period, beginning of 3rd marking period, we can see that decline happening right there. So that's bucking that trend as well. And then these are the specific target populations. The blue line is our sophomores. This year, you can see a dramatic decline, which is really great. And then the bottom 2 lines are our ESL students, one in terms of overall courses and the other in terms of overall students who are at risk. And you can see that those numbers are falling as well. So that is incredibly good news. I think it means that these programs are working and that our students are really on track to have a successful end of this school year. From Parsippany High School's perspective, we are going to continue on with our SEL supports. I didn't really speak about it here because our SEL programming is separate from the ESSER funding, as it is at the Hills. We're going to continue with our parent-student outreach, making sure that all of our students can access these tutorials and know that they're there for any student who needs them, whether they're being invited or not. Student wants to go, we can do it. And we also do still have some flexibility if we need to bring on an additional ESSER tutor or two in areas that aren't currently covered, world language, social studies, or if we need more math and English, depending on the number of students that are needing it. So we're in great shape, and I think we're going to have an excellent end of this school year. And thank you to, first of all, thank you for showing me how to do this, Carly and everybody else, but also for being really tremendous assets for me in my first year here, and showing me how to get it done. So we're doing it together, team effort. Thanks, everybody.